I am Kelsey Troutman, and the agency that I've been doing my internship through is Suncrest Counseling. They serve a variety of different clients, court mandated clients, different things like that. And I've been shadowing therapy sessions, doing substance abuse assessments, and also teaching some of the rotating group court classes. So the ethical dilemma that I'm going to be discussing was from a shadowing that I did with a client. I shadowed him quite a few times and got to know his background and him fairly well. And the ethical dilemma that came up was during one of his individual counseling sessions. So he's a male in mid 30s probably. He is in the accountability group, and what that is it's a group designed for those who are registered sex offenders, have committed sexual offenses, typically towards minors. And so this particular client was in that program and on probation, had a parole officer and certain stipulations that he had to maintain as part of that. So the client is divorced after the incident, but has 4 children, and he has not been allowed to see his children or have any interaction with his children since the incident happened. And he is able to contact his ex-wife, but there's no visitation or pictures or things like that. She just will give him updates. So the ethical dilemma that came up, the client came into the session and was talking about confidentiality. And he said, everything, that I'm telling you is supposed to be confidential, right? So the therapist went over the stipulations of confidentiality, kind of what that looks like, situations where he would have to report something, obviously any type of abuse or something like that. But there's also the extra factor with accountability clients where they have certain things that they can't do. And if they violate that, there's the potential that they have to report that to their parole officer. So what ended up happening was the client disclosed that he had sent sexual pictures on his phone to another person, and that is in complete violation of his probation. And his concern was that by telling his parole officer about it, it was going to set him back, and he wouldn't be able to see his children as soon as he wants to, because that was his whole motivation and goal in completing the assignments and the therapy and the accountability group, is so that he could have visitation with his kids and see them sooner and help them. He had a son in particular who was really struggling in school and just with not having him there, and so he really felt motivated to want to be there for his child. And so the therapist kind of had an ethical dilemma as to whether or not to report the situation and what happened, encourage the client to report it to his parole officer, or if he just lets it go so that he can kind of be on the fast track to be with his child and to help his child who was kind of in need at that time. So the case problem, I focused on the micro aspect of things with the client, kind of the different things surrounding his situation. Definitely pornography addiction, which contributed to the crime to begin with, and him having to kind of overcome that, especially being on probation. His church and religious beliefs played a huge role in his life. He discussed meeting with his bishop and discussing things that happened and wanting to be more social within his church and create more friendships. Obviously, the crime that was committed and the mistakes that he's made has played a huge influence on his life. The treatment team that are trying to help him and counsel him, his children and his family obviously play a huge role. He really wants to get back in touch with them. And then work and career. He was very career oriented, very work oriented, and it was really important to him to be able to support himself and his family. And then obviously like society and the judgment that society places on these types of crimes and these types of behaviors and how that influences him and his recovery and his self-esteem. So the cultural considerations for this dilemma, it's really the type of society views when it comes to these kind of type of crimes. It really inhibits clients a lot of times, and especially this client in particular. He just felt really nervous to interact with people and potentially, share with people kind of what he's going through. There's a lot of guilt, there's a lot of shame involved in that as well. And then obviously his inability to see his children is a huge barrier for him. And he just wants to do whatever he can possible so that he has that ability to see his children again and interact with them and be a more present part of their lives, particularly the child who is really struggling right now. So the theories that I use to kind of conceptualize my understanding of the dilemma, I definitely looked at the systems theory just to see how the client responds to the environment and the world around him and kind of how that influences his crime, and also the dilemma itself, where he has a desire and a need to want to be with somebody in a relationship, and he talks about in therapy quite a bit the value he places on having a healthy, good relationship, and kind of his setbacks, due to pornography addiction and media and different things like that, where he's pursuing relationships that might not necessarily be the most healthy for him or that are going to help him with his goals and his values in recovery. I also utilize the psychodynamic theory because looking at the client's past experiences and trauma and kind of what shaped him and influenced the decisions in his life and kind of what led him to where he is was important in understanding him and understanding why he did what he did and how he can move forward and be able to overcome some of the things that he has struggled with in the past and recently. The ethical framework that I felt to use for this decision making was definitely the strengths-based framework. I feel like it's helpful for the client to be able to kind of identify his strengths, what value he has, and therefore be able to make the right decisions for him, even though it may be difficult. Definitely the therapist and I kind of talked about that, about talking with the client about how he values integrity and honesty, and he values doing the right things. And part of sharing with the therapist his mistake is because he truly does want to do the right thing. And so kind of focusing on that to kind of help the client make the decision on his own that, hey, I need to report this to my parole officer, even if it sets me back from seeing my children, just because it's the right thing to do, because I made a mistake and I need to own up to that. So that was kind of the perspective that the therapist discussed and talked about potentially talking with the client about. The client's perception of the problem, he's very open and honest about the problem and the dilemma, but he really felt like he didn't want it to be shared. He really felt like he wanted it to just be disclosed to the therapist, and that was good enough, because the client's very aware of the consequences of his choices, and obviously it delaying his treatment and his ability to see his children. So he was nervous, and he was, rightfully so, understanding that he made a mistake and the potential setbacks that could have for him, not just with his children, but he could lose his access to his phone and internet and different things like that he had gained the privilege of. He could lose that potentially because of this choice. So the client's strengths, definitely he's very hardworking. He has 3 different jobs. He's very into technology, very trusted by his employers. He just does a great job of focusing on working hard and providing for him and for his children. That is just a huge strength of his. Some limitations are definitely the black and white thinking in his past, kind of his addictions and struggles with pornography, those all limit him in his ability to kind of move past making some similar mistakes. The thing that this ethical dilemma has kind of taught me about being a better social worker is definitely overcoming my own implicit bias. I didn't know that I really had that until working with this particular population. And it's been interesting to sit in on therapy sessions and to kind of see things from their point of view, how their past and their traumas influence their decisions and the role that pornography plays in all of these crimes, really. And just being able to kind of focus more on the individual, their strengths, and them wanting to become better and to be in recovery and to make better choices for themselves is been really rewarding as a potential social worker. So that has been really good. Anyway, that is my presentation. Thank you so much for watching.